Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome along to the Hong Kong View episode number 2, where we've got another bumper edition to look forward to, rattling through Sha Tin at the weekend, looking ahead to Sha Tin on Sunday, and also meeting in the middle with Happy Valley on Wednesday. I'm delighted to be joined again by Tim Carroll. Tim, how are you this week?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Luca. Great to be back with you again.
So I think the best starting point to talk of is the wonderful racing we had on Sha Tin on Sunday morning. I think we'll kick things off with Panfield. He ran it earlier on in the card, and he really boosted his Hong Kong Derby credentials with a relatively impressive success. He's a 3-time winner in Chile, a Group 1 winner in Chile, and he's highly recognisable, trained by Tony Millard with those plaited manes. What did you think of his performance, and how could you assess his chance ahead of what could potentially be a tilt of the Hong Kong Derby?
I thought it was a very good performance. I mean, it's difficult to get a handle on the Chilean form, but to be fair, they're a proud racing nation. If you've got a horse winning Group 1s like he was, up to 12 furlongs, in somewhere like Chile, obviously he's got some sort of engine. That was his first win in Hong Kong. He's only had a handful of starts, although, to be fair, he was a bit unlucky to start before it. Maybe he should have a couple of wins next to his name. From a Derby perspective, it's a big jump up in the race he won. And the thing that would worry me a little bit is Joe Moreira said afterwards, and fairly quickly, that he was going to stick with Sky Darcy. And of course, Joe rode him when he won last time. But look, it was a good performance. He's a horse, as far as Hong Kong goes, he's got plenty of upside. In fact, he was fairly lightly raced in South America as well. So potentially he's got a lot of upside all round. He wouldn't be my idea of the Derby winner, but yeah, it was a good performance.
Do you think he possibly lacks the gears to win a Derby? He seems slightly one pace to me, and perhaps lacks that gear change to perhaps win a Derby.
Yeah, I think it's a fair enough comment. Although I suppose this year, unlike last year when Golden 60 won the Derby, won the Triple Crown, 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was, Rapid Dragon took out the Triple Crown. There's not a single horse that's kicking the door in at the moment saying I'm the one to beat in the Derby. So I suppose, to be fair, if things panned out nicely for him on the day, maybe. But as you said, he probably does look a little bit one-paced. And he did actually win, as I said, over 12 furlongs back home in Chile. So if anything, he's probably a little bit more effective over further.
So as far as Hong Kong Derby picture's going, who would be your sort of early sort of contender you potentially think's got a good chance at winning the big race?
I'm going to be honest, it really is even on paper. I think I saw somewhere someone put up some early betting for it. It was around about 4-1 the field, which is indicative of the sort of race we got this year. Before I go in with any confidence, I'd want to see the makeup of the field and the draw. I think you've got to look at a few. I mean, Russian Emperor was very good on the weekend. He'd done nothing prior to that, but by goodness, he probably should have won. He would have won if he went straight. Excellent proposal. Sky Darcy, I wouldn't give up on him, although I kind of get the feeling, even though Joe's sticking solid, I kind of get the feeling that the 10 furlongs isn't really his caper. I think he's more of a miler somewhere around there. Personal Waltham, massive run on the weekend. He finished back in about 5th or 6th, got into plenty of trouble. As we know, that race didn't really set up for the back markets that strongly. So it's really open. If push came to shove, I thought the best run on the weekend was Excellent Emperor from a Russian Emperor, I should say, from a Derby perspective. But he was a little bit green. He ran around, and I just don't know whether he's going to reproduce that effort, whether he's going to go straight. At the risk of being a little bit boring, I think Excellent Proposal was a very good run as well. I think he's far more straightforward. And the other thing is John Size is such a good trainer. You know that. All right, he would have been fit for the race on the weekend, but you know that John's going to get a little bit more improvement out of him before the Derby.
So sticking with the sort of Derby picture, we'll mention the Hong Kong Classic Cup since we spoke about a number of horses who ran. Healthy Happy won the race. Alexis Badil seemed to really have the run in the race, and we mentioned about the back markers, not really getting into it. Russian Emperor on a screamer. Do you think the winner just perhaps had the run on the race that day, and perhaps the rest from in behind just had a bit of traffic problems?
Well, if you have a look at the sectionals, it will say he had a fairly good time. But to be fair, I still think it was a pretty decent performance. And he's another horse that's got a bit of upside as well. He's already won a few times. I mean, you would not say no to him in the Derby. But, again, it's an extra furlong. And those horses back in second, I think the second, the third, the fifth and the sixth were screaming home. So you'd have to sort of think that maybe he's going to be vulnerable over the 10 furlongs.
So moving on to the Queen's Silver Jubilee Cup, Lukuku won the race. That was 1,300 wins now for John Size. The race seemed a little bit tactical to me, where we had Buddies and Kaying Star, who we mentioned, would go forward. They seemed to take each other on quite quickly, and by the time Zach got to the lead, perhaps he used a little too much petrol up than he might have wanted, and it allowed the closest from him behind to come up and win. Well, Cuckoo's bounced back to form there, so it was a really good win for him to show that he's still capable of performing at the top level.
Yeah, looking at the sectionals, 13.68 for the first furlong, then they ran 22 dead for the next two, which is probably a little bit too quick even for the class over 7 furlongs. I mean, it's not belting along, it's not ridiculous. If they break 22, then you'd be a little bit concerned. As you know, on the show last week, we sort of flagged up Kane Star as maybe a little bit of value because I thought the race had set up a little bit better for him. In the end, he was beaten 2 lengths. I'm not going to make too many excuses for him. You've got to remember the first two, Waikuku and Southern Legend, were the only 2 Group 1 winners going into the race. And, hindsight's a wonderful thing. But in hindsight, I suppose it's just a case of the cream's risen to the top there with Waikuku coming out on top. To be fair, we gave him a good mention. We thought he'd be tough to beat. But again, I think he went off somewhere around about 10 to 9 on the Hong Kong tote. So he was short enough in the betting. But, he's come out and won. He's a very good horse. He's now got a couple of Group 1s next to his name. And Southern Legend, I thought, ran very well, considering he's probably better over a little bit. Not probably, he's definitely better over a little bit further. Certainly a mile and even 9 furlongs.
So we'll talk about John Size here. It's 1,300 wins for him now, and to do it while winning a Group 1's even more better than probably it looked. And just for people who perhaps don't know too much about John, sum him up for me. How good of a trainer is John Size in Hong Kong?
Oh, I think he's a brilliant trainer. He's actually an Australian Hall of Fame trainer. He landed in Hong Kong, I think, in around about 2001, so he's been over there for a while. And he's only the 3rd trainer in Hong Kong to train 100 plus winners. John Moore finished his career in Hong Kong last season on 1,700 and something. And Tony Cruz, I think he sits in the mid 1300s at the moment. So, when you look at the wonderful trainers and the amount of time that they've been based in Hong Kong, John Size will be remembered as an all-time great. Probably the 3 I've mentioned would be the 3 that would sort of, stand out. I mean, David Hayes won the championship a few years ago, went back to Australia and is back again. But, John Size, without a shadow of a doubt, is one of the greatest trainers anywhere in the world.
So as far as the championship is concerned, for the trainers, the Premiership, it's quite tight at the moment. You've got lots of Casper fans in there at the top of the table. It looks like it could go down to the wire this season, and I think it's looking quite tight. Who would your money be on? Would it be on Casper fans possibly? You had a good treble at Happy Valley during the week. Would it be on him maybe, or could someone else come up the rail and potentially poach him?
I think I'd probably side with John Size. I think he's got the numbers there, and he's got some nice young horses. The other thing about John, he's a very patient trainer. I mean, he won't be pushed and shoved around by owners. He's got the record there, and he can do it his way. And he's notorious for bringing his horses on quite slowly. In fact, quite often at the start of the season, he won't have many runners. He prefers to give them that extra couple of weeks before he puts them back into action. So. It will probably go down to the wire. It's one thing about Hong Kong, actually, whether it be the trainers or the jockeys told them, my goodness, we've seen some great fights over the years, and I've got a feeling this year will be similar. But if push came to shove, I'd be putting my money on John Size.
Let's move into the showpiece of the weekend, the Hong Kong Gold Cup. It went the way of Golden 60. 13 proved not to be unlucky for Golden 60. A narrow win. Fiore went down on his sword in what looked a tactical race. Time Walk went forward. What did you make of Golden 60? He just scraped home here.
Yeah, well, he's now had 2 runs over 10 furlongs. He's only just got there on both occasions. I know early on they crawled and then they sped it up when one of the runners made a move around the outside. But he was never more than about 4 or 5 lengths off the lead. I think there's a couple of excuses there because of the early pace early, but at the same time, I just kind of thought, I'm starting to think that 10 furlongs might not be his caper. They said afterwards, actually, that they're going to consider going down that route, so that'll be interesting. I thought he was just, when you say it's that disappointing, he's come out and won, he's come from the back, they've ridden him like a good thing again towards the rear, it's a small field, as I say, he was only 4 or 5 off the lead, but circled the field again, and he's got there. And let's not forget, Ferror is a Derby winner, he's a pretty good horse himself, especially when he puts it all together. He was given an absolute brilliant ride from Joe Moreira in the race as well. It's probably not one of his, if you look at it from a numbers perspective, it certainly wouldn't be one of his top performances, but he got the job done.
So looking back at the race, we mentioned about the horse who made that daring move halfway through. It turned to be Blake Shin on, I think it was Columbus County. And when he made that move, I kind of had the thought that he was going to try and do what he did in the Derby last year, but it just didn't quite seem to work out. But talking of the other runners in the race, what did you make of Exultant's run? I just think he perhaps lacked that turn of foot we mentioned last week. That's perhaps made it, which perhaps allowed him not to get on terms with the 2 at the top.
Yeah, I think, look, he's a 7-year-old now. He's always been a tad dour, and I kind of get the feeling his best chances of beating some of these horses now is over 12 furlongs. I'm not talking about Golden 60, even though they mentioned the possibility he could step up to 12. I'd be shocked if we saw him over a mile and a half. But I think the bottom line is that he's a 7-year-old, and whilst he's still very good, he's not quite as good as he was when he was a younger horse. So he's really honest. So you know you're going to get a run every time he turns out. But I haven't had a look at the international rating on him, but I would suggest he's probably running 3 or 4 pounds below what he was this time last year and certainly the year before.
I just want to talk about Glorious Dragon. I think he ran a mighty race. I think he had to make up £20 with Exultant on the day, and to finish him, I think only a couple of lengths behind him was perhaps a better run than what people might think it looked like.
Yeah, look, he was back in 4th spot. I agree. I thought it was a very good run, especially when he gets back down in grade and it isn't taking on the likes of Golden 60 and Exultant. But yeah, it was a very good effort. I think if you get away from the top 3, you start to move away from the class just a little bit. But from a futures perspective, it was a very, very good effort. And also, he came from the back. I mean, he sat out the back of Columbus County. As we know, Columbus County made that early move. He did in a race that I think they ran the first half mile, if I remember correctly, was a tick under 52. Now, you've got to tack on that, unlike Japan and one or two other jurisdictions, they do it from a stand start. So the first furlong is always going to be a tad slow, but that is still very slow. I mean, the next quarter mile, I think they ran in about 46 and a half, to give you an idea. So the first part of the race has really shaped the race overall, and I don't think that race was run to suit anything that was out the back, that's for sure, even though it was a field of only 7 runners. So you'd mark his run up a little bit, but I certainly wouldn't say he was unlucky.
So with Golden 60, would you be keen to drop him back down to a mile? Would something like the Champions Mile be something that you could perhaps see him as more effective over to use that devastating turn of foot he's got? Or perhaps the 2,000 metres be something you'd want to try and keep him at, although he's run twice there and he's just scraped home. So if he was training Golden 60, where would you be wanting to try and aim him at?
I'd want to keep it at a mile. I've got a feeling the Connections might try him at 10 furlongs again because it opens up a few more options. But to send him over 10 furlongs, I would think anyway that the trainers had to work him and train him a little bit differently since his last run. And he tanked throughout. He travelled strongly. When he moved up on the outside, it just looked like he was going to win under hands and heels by 3 or 4 lengths. It didn't quite work out that way. I just wonder, you quite often see it if you put more work into them, it just negates their turn of foot a little bit. Look, I personally think he's going to be more effective at the mile, but at the same time, it wouldn't shock me if they decided to at least give him one more go at 10 furlongs. Although, keep in mind that there was a horse called Silent Witness who won 17 straight in Hong Kong. It's the record. Many people would say Silent Witness is the greatest Hong Kong horse of all time. Well, Golden 60 now sits at 13. That's well within his sights. Now, if they want to grab that record, then maybe they might say, well, hang on, he's probably better at a mile. It's far more straightforward. We know we've got all the milers here well and truly covered. Let's drop him back to the mile and keep him there. So, there's the lure. There's a carrot both ways, isn't there? More options that way. Prestigious races if you step up to 10 furlongs. If you keep him to the mile, you're probably going to take that record, I would think.
So looking ahead as well, another star returned on Monday, I think it was, the Barrow Child. Athero's back. He's had his problems with his bleeding. I think last year he bombed out twice badly after looking like a really good horse in 2019. We saw at his best. He destroyed Hot King Prawn in the Jockey Club Sprint. He looked very, very good. And obviously he's had his niggles since. He's back on track now. If he can get anywhere near back to his best, just how good do you think he could be again, Athero?
If they could get him back to his best, and if he could realise his potential, I've got no doubt he's in the very, very top echelon of sprinters in the world, even though he hasn't won a Group 1. When he hit the scene, all the figures you looked at were a little bit like you get people who do the numbers, and you look at it and occasionally you see something and your jaw just sort of hits the desk, so to speak. And that's what was the case with him very early on. I hope they can get him back to his best. The horseman side of me would say that I don't know if he'll ever be I just don't think he'll be as good as what we thought he was going to be. When it comes to bleeding, there's small bleeds and there's big bleeds, and my understanding is it was quite a big bleed, and that's, he was formerly with John Moore, who's gone back to Australia, and And Casper Founds has him now, and it's fairly evident that they're being really, really cautious with him and really patient. The difficulty you've got as a trainer when a horse bleeds like that, and in Hong Kong now, it's not that long ago they changed the rule, I think, 2 bleeds and you're out. It's a little bit like Australia, and his only option after that, only serious option would be to send him to America and put him on Lasix. But the problem you've got as a trainer is it's really difficult. You've got to be cautious, and you kind of get a little bit scared to work them too hard because you know that they're a little bit delicate that way. But they've done the right thing. They've brought him along with a lot of patience, and let's just hope they can get him back. He looked good in the trial the other day, but to be fair, he was under double wraps, and we're not going to know that. Yeah, we're not going to know if he's going to hold up until he comes under race pressure. But let's hope he does, because I promise you, if he ever gets back to what he looked like, if he gets back to where he was and then gets to where he looked like he was going, he's probably top 3, top 4 sprinters in the world.
So if we compare him to, say, the rest of the Hong Kong division in terms of sprinting, do you think the division itself lacks a potential standout superstar? I know we've got Hot King Prawn in there who's now finally won a Group 1, but apart from him, do you think there's something else, or do you think there's a division that's really lacking in sort of star quality?
It's low on quality at the moment, but let's not forget Classique Legend. Now, I know that he bombed on International Day, but that was a horrible campaign he had for that. They won the Everest, and that was his grand final. Lesbridge got him ready for the Everest, and then quickly after that, they had to send him down to Victoria to go through quarantine over to Hong Kong. He's there, well, I was going to say for 2 minutes. He was there a little bit longer, but he didn't have a lot of time to acclimatise. And Casper Founds said numerous times, I feel like we're a little bit behind the 8 ball. And the race didn't pan out for him. It was just he's a world quality horse. And when he won the Everest, he ran one of the biggest, if not the biggest, sprint figure in the world for last year. It was certainly right up there anyway. So him aside, yeah, I would agree. Hot King Prawn is a really nice horse. But it has taken him a long time to win a Grade 1 or a Group 1. To be fair, he was out with injury for a while as well. He had a bad colic attack. And he's a sprinter you and I would love to own, but when you're talking about some of the sprinters we've seen in Hong Kong over the last 10 years or so, or over the last 20 years, he wouldn't be in the league of the very best. He'd be the next run underneath. So Classique Legend, jury's still out as far as Hong Kong goes. The rest, I would agree, they're a bit below par at the moment.
So sticking with the returns and the barrier trials topic, Winning Dream is going to barrier trial tomorrow at Sha Tin, a horse who's really found his feet in Hong Kong, won 6 out of 7 before getting beaten at 7th start in the Chinese Club Cup Challenge Cup, I think it was at Sha Tin. He's a horse who looks to have the world at his feet if he can recapture sort of that winning sequence again.
Oh, absolutely. He looks very exciting. He's only a young horse. He's shot up, his rating has shot right up. He might have been a little bit disappointing last time out. The rider was pulled in for a Please Explain. There might have even been a couple of reasons as to why. It could have been a step up in grade as well, but don't be surprised if he comes back bigger and better than ever. He's got plenty of upside to him. As you say, he's only had 7 runs so far, which, my European terms might be a few actually for a really good horse, but certainly not in Hong Kong. I mean, they'll run them 7-8 times a year, if not more.
So sticking with the barrier trial sort of topic, for people who are at home and perhaps don't know much about a barrier trial, what do they do? Because over here we seem to work our horses quite privately on gallops, and it's very rare we see a trainer take a horse to a race course for a race course gallop. You might see John Gosden maybe do it a few times a season. I know Nicky Anderson's a big advocate of doing that, but for a barrier trial, just explain to people, what does that do and how effective can that be?
Well, there's a couple of there's a few positives. Firstly, it's a way of getting the horse fit. You won't see it in a barrier trial. The trainer and the jockey can do what they like. They can come out and just sit there and go half pace and sit out the back and just let the horse sort of get going a little bit over the last couple of furlongs. Or you can come out and treat it like a race if you really want to harden them up. You don't tend to see that, but it's a very good thing for education. It gets, especially younger horses, it gets them accustomed to, well, firstly, jumping out of the stalls, which is very important in these speed-based nations, but also gets them accustomed to sort of race day conditions. You might not have a big crowd, but track work, I know over here they work them in lots, but over there you tend to work them on their own. You might work them with another one or maybe even 3 together if you want to do a gallop, but that's about it. Whereas in a barrier trial, you can get 10 horses, you can replicate those those conditions. And as I said, also as an educational tool, from a punter's perspective, if you know what you're looking at, it can be very helpful as well, because you can look at the horse and go, oh, my goodness, he or she's carrying a bit of condition, we'll need this. You can look at their behaviour. I find it very good for the younger horses. With a horse like Ethereum, he's on the comeback trail. You want to have a look at how he looks and how he goes in the trail. As I said, we're not going to know until he lets down, but at least we know the way he won that trial the other day, at least we know he's headed in the right direction.
So moving into Happy Valley yesterday, I'm going to start off with the Blue Pool handicap here. Before we talk about the eventual winner, I know Grateful Heart, he won the DBS Millions Challenge. Although he didn't win his race, it was enough to pull him through. I think he finished with 70 points ahead of Scores of Fun, who finished in second on 57 points. So that was quite a lucrative sort of proposition to win.
Yeah, it's an issue for the Hong Kong Jockey Club. I've forgotten what the prize money is, but for some reason I've got a feeling it's around about the equivalent of about £60,000 to £70,000. So it's not a bad little bit of prize money to pick up. And even though he was defeated, he had the most points. So the prize money in Hong Kong is just phenomenal. You see, Class 5 races and they're racing for £100,000. I'm looking over here. We've got a Group 2 at £100,000. It's the envy of the world.
So it's talking of the race itself, Skyfield swooped late. I thought Grateful Heart, it looks to be throughout the large part of the race, it's going to be a vintage Zach Burton ride, go from the front and don't get pegged back. But Alexi Badil came a very late surge and mugged stronger on the line as well, trained by Douglas White with Vincent Ho in the saddle as well. Yeah,
look, I didn't find the winner as well backed as well. I know he's a good horse, but I didn't think this race had set up overly well for him, and I don't think it did set up well for him, which only adds further merit to the victory. Stronger we gave a good each way mention to because he was dropping in grade. And I know Douglas White thinks he's a pretty handy sprinter. He ran second. I thought Grateful Heart was given an excellent ride from Burton, and all things considered, I thought he was a little bit disappointing back in third. The two you'd take out of the race. Now, to be fair, you'd take the first two out of the race going forward, but also Beauty Applause. We sort of flagged him up, and unfortunately, he just broke a little bit slowly, and then he copped a bump from a horse. He ended up back in the field, and that's not his caper. He needs to be up on the speed. I thought he'd kind of be up on the outside of Grateful Heart or there or thereabouts. That's normally how he runs. And all things considered, I certainly wouldn't give up on him going forward. I thought it was a better run than what it looked on paper. Not that I'm going to suggest for a second he should have won the race, because the winner overcame a pretty tough race setup and was impressive. But Skyfield the winner, and probably Beauty Applause would be the two I'd take out of the race going forward.
I want to talk about the final race at Happy Valley. Green Luck was very, very impressive. I thought the way he dispatched his field was very, very good. And I was also impressed with Saar in second. He's a former John Gosden horse who showed some promise over here. I think he won 3 out of 5. And I thought it was going a very good ride by Tony Pacone to finish second. But talking of the winner here, Green Luck, how impressed were you with his performance, Tim?
Oh, very impressed because I flagged him up. So it was good to see because it was a pretty tough day. It was one of only 2 winners, although we did sort of smash into the Jockeys Challenge, which worked out all right. And we needed Joe Moreira to win this to win the Jockeys Challenge. But he was coming back down. I just need to double check, actually. But look, I thought he was pretty impressive. But as I said, I flagged him up. But it was interesting because he's a 4-time winner over course and distance. Now, Encanto Prepared, who ran 3rd in this race, and I made this point in the article, he's trained by John Sias, and Joe Moreira won on him last time out. Now, when Joe jumps off a horse to jump on another, that's a large start winner trained by John Sias, that's normally a pretty big clue within itself. And it worked out well. As you said, he won by 2.5 lengths. It could have been 3rd. It was a very good ride from Joe again, too. He just parked him up in the right position. And it was good to see Zar with a little bit of form again. I think he went up at about $103 on the Hong Kong total, 102 to 1. But, yeah, look, it was a very good effort. He drew out in 12. He dropped out the back. He was literally out in last spot. He's made up a heck of a lot of ground, and he's finished second. So provided he can build on that, you'd think he'd have to be worth following going forward.
Now, moving into Shartin on Sunday, there's not a standout group race this weekend, but we've got a Class 2 to get our teeth into at 6 o'clock. It's the Lam Soon Handicap. I think I've pronounced that correctly. Hopefully I've not slaughtered that. Beauty Smile is number 1 on the race card here. He's won his last 2, and I've been quite impressed with him and the way he's performed. Matthew Chadwick's booked to ride again. Looking at the race itself, it looks quite a tightly contested race. Who would your fancy be in this race, Tim?
Oh, yeah, I like Beauty Smile. I think he'll take a lot of beating. He's conceding weight all around 8 to 14 pounds here, which is no easy task, but he brings by far and away the best form. He was actually formerly trained in Ireland by Joe Lyons, and he looked pretty handy there. His name was Justifier. Yeah, he'd be the one to beat. As I said, he's got to give away a lot of weight, but by goodness, his form recently has been good. I think he'd be pretty short in the betting. I don't think he'd get much of a prize, but he looks one of the better bets on the card.
And also looking at the rest of the card, have you got any other picks that you can recommend to people watching this at home ahead of the weekend?
Yeah, race 7 on the card is really interesting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I'm quite keen on Charity Fun here, who was formerly trained by Paddy Toomey in Ireland. Now, he's a horse we flagged up last time when he romped in this grade at Happy Valley. Now, he needs to win this to go on to the Derby. Now, keeping in mind, he only had 2 starts in Ireland, and he won a maiden at Ferryhouse over 10 furlongs. He's only had 2 starts in Hong Kong. He was beaten over the mile, but put in a bit of an eye catch. And then last time out, he tanked on the pace, which surprised me. I thought they'd ride him quietly. He tanked on the pace throughout, and he ended up winning by 4 lengths. Now, he's gone up £10 for that. He's got more on his plate here, but I think he's probably got these covered. And even though he's going off joint top weight, if you want to be going into a derby and considered some sort of play, you should be able to win a Class 3 handicap off top weight.
So in terms of transitioning from Happy Valley to Sha Tin, for a horse who's won so well at Happy Valley, which is a completely different track in my opinion, what would you sort of be looking for in a horse to try and be as effective at Sha Tin as he would be at Happy Valley?
Oh, Sha Tin's going to suit a horse that, wants I'm talking about Hong Kong standards here, but wants a little bit of ground like this horse, or is going to be better over further. It needs to wind up. Happy Valley is a very sharp track, one of the sharpest anywhere in the world, and it does suit horses that can get out and ping. Now, having said that, you will quite often see horses run over the top from the second wave because they just go too quickly. But if you've got a horse drawn low at Happy Valley just about over any trip, and you know they're not going to go stupid on the front, and it's a horse that naturally likes to sit in the first 3 or 4, that's definitely the place to be at Happy Valley. But again, you do see it at Happy Valley when they start coming out and running stupid sectionals and they overcook it on the front. All of a sudden, everything from the back is flying home. But even then, you need luck because it's a tight turning track with a very short straight. I would say Sha Tin, well, you need luck in any race on any track, but I'd say Sha Tin probably has less hard luck stories overall.
So moving into the question side of things now, I put a couple of tweets out during the week to ask for any questions. We've got a handful in, but I want to start things off myself and just ask, watching the racing yesterday, I think it was Alex Hammond in the studio, and she spoke quite highly of João Moreira and also Zach Purton. But do you think sometimes there's a slight overrating of their mount sometimes when they get backed in just because of how good they are, rather instead of the actual quality of the horse they're riding?
Yep, for sure, and you'll get that anywhere. I call it the AP McCoy effect, actually. We used to see it with AP over the jumps. Quite often you'd be expecting to get 3-1, 7-2 about a horse, and it'd be 2s or 7-4 because AP had jumped on it, in the McManus colours, and JP had 3 or 4 in the race, and straight away you knew the one that AP was on was going to be the one that would get all the attention. To be fair, at one point there, Joe and I was having a look at this a while ago. I haven't updated it, but Joe and Zach had ridden something like 30% of the winners in Hong Kong over a 3-month period. So I suppose statistically speaking, you would understand why they're backed. They both get offered. It'd be very rare for either of them not to be offered more than one ride in a race. So again, you look at it, and it's a little bit like when I was saying a moment ago that I saw João Moreira jumped off a John Size runner who'd won its last race and something like 3 of its last 5. Well, straight away you want to have a look at what he's jumping on and why, and you delve into it. There is a bit of that effect, but again, they're both champion riders. Both of them have won the Hong Kong Jockey Premiership on numerous occasions, and it's a very deep pool over there. So if you can go over there and win that title, you're obviously a pretty handy rider. And dare I say, the other thing is too, because you get all these riders coming from different parts of the world, there's some pretty big egos over there, and you've got to know what you're doing. You've got to be able to handle yourself on race day. And it's one of the reasons I like Zach, and I would hope if he watches this, he'll take it the right way. But he's got a touch of arrogance about him. But just about every leading sportsman I know, even and Zach's very nice. You go and interview him, he'll give you the time of day, no problem at all. But just about any leading sports person I've interviewed, even people you consider to be really nice people, they do just have that bit of arrogant streak about them. Maybe I'm mistaking it for confidence. I don't know, but Zach definitely has that. You can put Zach in the middle of the derby over here tomorrow, and he would go into it feeling like he was as good as any rider in the race.
So do you think it's slightly harder for sort of the middle sort of middle of the road jockeys perhaps in Hong Kong to try and get the bigger opportunities? I know over here we've got the likes of Tom Marquand, Holly Doyle. There's so many jockeys all competing on the big stage in Group 1 level over here. But do you think it's slightly harder for the slightly lesser jockeys to get the bigger rides on the bigger days, knowing that Hong Kong's dominated by 2 sort of heavyweight jockeys in a way?
Yeah, I think it is. You've got the two heavyweights, and then you've got people like Karis Teat and a few others just below that, and then you get one or two apprentices that obviously get a lot of rides because of their claim. And outside of that, it gets very difficult. But you've got to remember, as we touched on a moment ago, most of these races are worth £100,000 each. So it's not like you've got to come out and ride 100 winners a season to be making a quid. Neil Cullen's been over there for years and has done very well. Neil's sort of like he's the sort of person, if it was a cricket team, he'd be the all-rounder. He might not be the best batsman, he might not be the best bowler, he might not be the best wicket-keeper or fielder, but he's someone you can put in any position, and the trainers and the connections over there like him. Now, Neil's never going to win the championship over there, and I say that with all respect, but he's going to come out and he's going to ride his 20 to 30 winners every season, maybe a few more even, and there's a reason why he's been based over there for many years. It's a good lifestyle. You only have to ride races twice a week. You've got to ride a bit of track work, and you make a good living.
So moving to the next question, it's from Matthew Stevenson here. It says, genuine question, what is the level of interest in Hong Kong racing from people in the UK?
Look, I think it varies. Obviously, when COVID hit and we were shut down over here for a couple of months, the level went through the roof. I was nearly working full time just answering questions on social media and trying to point people in the right direction. There's no doubt it doesn't matter where you come from. If you're in Australia, Australian racing is your bread and butter. That's what you enjoy. Same in America, same with Europe, same with people in Hong Kong. But I think what really helps Hong Kong, as far as Europe's concerned, is that Neil Cullen's over there. There's not a lot of European jockeys, but a lot of them go over there for the big hit and run jobs on the big races. So that brings awareness. You've got trainers over there like Richard Gibson, formerly over here, but also because of the exposure it gets, and dare I say, the wonderful coverage on Sky Sports Racing and ATR. People know Joe Moreira, they know Zach Purton, they know all of these riders. And the other thing is, as we've already explained today, we're talking about ex-Aidan O'Brien runners being a chance in the Derby. Hong Kong doesn't have a breeding industry, so the horses have to come from somewhere. And the very large majority of them, Australia/New Zealand, England/Ireland. I mean, there are ones from France and South America, but that is where the majority come from. So I suppose if you get a little bit of familiarisation, whether it be a jockey, a trainer, or a horse, that creates a bit of interest. But I'd like to think, too, over the last few years, certainly over the last couple of years since we've had the article on ATR and the coverage on Sky Sports Racing, I'd like to think there's a higher level of interest. And again, that 2 months during the ban over here, I get a lot of people say to me, I didn't even realise this was so good. I really enjoy it. And that's great to hear,
So just for the interaction in terms of when you post your picks and your sort of weekly views, how much interaction do you get from people sort of based over here? Because I see from an outsider looking in, you do get quite a lot of traction. That can only be a positive thing for promoting the sport from based in England.
Yeah, look, when we tip up 4 or 5 winners, I'm the greatest person in the world. When we have a cold day, well, I'm the biggest mug in the world. That's the way it always works. But look, to be fair, actually, there's a lot of people who interact on a regular basis, and they ride the waves. They understand it. If you're going to put out an article trying to give a winner in every race, no one expects you to tip up 10 out of 10. That's not. Tipsters are sort of trying to make a quid. They might find 1 or 2 on the card. But I find that the large majority of people, the very large majority of people are great, even on the bad days. So most people now, they watch so much racing, they're pretty learned, and they can see if a horse runs second or third and it's a good thing beaten, they kind of feel your pain, if you know what I mean. And to be straightforward, I think most people know that I'm a punter, so, if they're napping the next best are getting stuffed, I'm going down with the ship as well, sort of thing. And if they're both going in, well, we're all having a party. But there is a lot of reaction, and to be honest with you, 98% of it is absolutely brilliant. Occasionally you get a wally, but I'm old enough and been around long enough to deal with those idiots.
So moving into the next question, it's from Ben Stokes here. Views on the strict rules around the Hong Kong jockey integrity over there, and would it be let me rephrase that again, because there's 2 questions or multiple questions all rolled into one here. So the first question of his numerous questions here is views on the strict rules around jockey integrity over in Hong Kong, and would it be workable in other jurisdictions?
To be honest with you, I think if anything, they sort of are on the side of caution a little bit in Hong Kong. Sometimes I nearly feel sorry for a jockey. I sort of think, gee, that wasn't that bad, or gee, that's a lengthy ban, or a big fine for what they've done. But to be honest, I prefer it that way. And the other thing is too, if you talk to riders, maybe not all of them, a lot of them prefer it as well, because at the end of the day, when you're a rider, you're the one who's putting your life on the line out there, and you don't want some cowboy cleaning you up because either there's a big pot on offer or they're incompetent. I'm actually a fan of it. I like it. I think you know where you stand in Hong Kong. You know if you get it wrong, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to get a lengthy suspension or a big fine. Would it work over here? Probably not, just because of the way the system has been. If you brought a similar system in from Hong Kong, I think there'd be a lot of people, jockeys and trainers for that matter, that would be in for a massive shock. Most of the leading stewards over the year, Hong Kong have brought in stewards mostly from Australia, and in Australia we are really strict and we give a lot of power to the stewards, far more than they have over here. And I don't want this taken the wrong way, because there's a lot of wonderful stewards over here, but they throw a lot more money at it in Australia, and I think that you get a more professional level just simply because of that, because people can go and make a serious career of being a steward. So they are very strict, but I like it. And look, just finally, I will say you've got to remember, if you go back far enough in Hong Kong racing, it was an absolute dog's breakfast. There was all sorts of things going on, and they quickly worked out it had to stop, and they had to clean it up for the betterment of the sport and to grow the sport. So they came in and they just ran the broom through it, and I think they should be applauded for that.
So do you think over here we could perhaps be a little bit more strict? So we've seen the likes of Kevin Blake and people on various different racing platforms speak quite openly about the whole concept of the stewards clamping down on some sort of foul play within races, and we've seen examples of it over the course of the flat season and even in national hunt racing too. So do you think the stewards over here are slightly more lenient to perhaps dangerous riding, people in inverted commas?
I don't know if it's actually the stewards the problem. I'd have to have a look at it. I think the rules over here are far too lenient. Some of the things you see that happen, and we have a stewards inquiry, and I know people like to think or like to say that the best horse should be awarded the race. I don't actually necessarily agree with that, because I don't think that you should be allowed to interfere with anyone else's chance in the race, even if it's just a chance to run second or third. That's unfair to those connections. It's unfair. If someone might have had whatever the size bet might be on something at 33-1, it gets beaten that far, it gets cleaned up by the winner, that far for third, gets cleaned up by the winner. How's that fair to those owners? How's that fair to those connections? How's that fair to the person who's had £100 each way on it? You think, well, I'm going to get 8-1 to place here. But look, anyway, the point being, yes, I think we're far too lenient here. I would agree with Kevin on most things that he says on that front. I don't necessarily agree with some of the things that are said by Kevin and other people in regards to what actually transpires in a race. I've had this argument with a lot of people. People say, you don't need to be a jockey to understand a race. So I get that. Of course, you can see a bad ride, you can see a good ride, you can look at sectionals, but race riding is exceptional in that you and I, I don't know about you, I'm never going to be driving Formula One race cars, but I can go out and drive a car. I can go to a track, not that long ago, I hired one and belted a Ferrari around it with ridiculous speeds for a bit of fun. I can't play football to save my life, but I've still played football. I've played cricket. I've had a bash at tennis and even basketball, even though I'm only 5'7". So you can relate. It's impossible to replicate a race unless you go and write races, if you know what I mean. So sometimes you see comments, both good and bad, that people make, and you think, well, look, I respect your view, but I don't think you fully appreciate what's going on in that race. I say this as a former jockey, albeit when it was back when Moses was playing fullback for Nazareth, but I can still remember what happens, and I think that helps you a little bit as well, just having an appreciation of what goes on in the race. But I do agree. I agree with Kevin. I agree with a lot of people that say this. I think we're far too lenient over here. If I could just give you one story quickly, I was on with John Berry, trainer John Berry on Sky Sports Racing one night. I think it was back in the ATR days, and John's been training for many years. And I said to John, have you ever had the stewards turn up unannounced at your yard for a stable visit? He said, never. I don't know a trainer that's got more than 6 horses in work in Australia that hasn't had the stewards turn up unannounced and go through there. They're fully within their right to go through your whole yard and check everything. Check in your fridge, make sure you haven't got anything untoward in there, i.e. illegal medications. Check your feeds, check everything. I do think we are too lenient. I think the sport would be a lot better off. I think punters would be a lot better off. I think connections would be a lot better off. I think jockeys would be a lot better off in the long run if we tightened it up.
I mean, just sticking with the whole stewards' visits to yards, we've got to be careful we don't drift off on a tangent here, but the whole Charles Burns sort of story that came up a couple of weeks ago of him, I think it was using sedatives into his runners, and it just didn't look good. And perhaps, do you think that, and also, of course, if there was perhaps more stricter guidelines, people checking in the yards every so often out of the blue, that things like this couldn't come to light, because it's also a welfare issue on the course. If a horse who's under a sedative sort of comes across a horse, another horse, it could cause carnage, couldn't it, on the race course? And it's something that perhaps needs to be clamped out.
Horrific. Look, the first thing we've got to point out is with Charles Burns, they've said, they've had the hearing and said that they've got no reason to believe that he was involved in the administration of that. But it is terrible that it can happen. My understanding is you've got up to about 7 or 8 hours before the race. You've got a time frame that sedative's got to be given for it to be effective. So you would have to think, there's a fair old chance it's happened at the racetrack or something like that. But when you see something like that, and then you hear a person of the stature of Jim Bolger making comments, and I'm not exactly sure who that was aimed at, but Jim's been around for a while. He's certainly no fool. I mean, he'd be one of the most respected men in the game. When you hear that, you've got to think that there's reasons for concern. And the other thing, and I don't mind saying this, and I can't give you an exact example simply because I'd be sued if I did, but I watch a lot of racing. All right, I might not have been riding well, but I've ridden races. I've got a bit of an idea what goes on. I think that there's too many races where, when I say too many, that's probably unfair, but there's more over here than I see anywhere else in a professional jurisdiction where I don't think horses are having a red hot go. And that's another thing about Hong Kong. You just don't see it, because if you're over there doing that, you'd be locked up literally in jail. You won't just be getting some silly little ban. But I think there's a few issues there, and that gets back to the rules. It gets back to stewarding and how strict they are and how much power they've got. And again, for the betterment of the game, I think that needs to be cleaned up. And look, I'm a horseman myself. I'm a horseman that's fallen into media, so I don't want this taken the wrong way. You'll get people who will defend all this. You'll get racing people sometimes will be offended by it. But as I said, you've already got people like Jim Bolger coming out and saying, what's going on here? This isn't right. These things need to be looked at. Everyone wants a level playing field, and I like it's one of the reasons, as you said, we won't go off on a tangent. It's one of the reasons I don't like pacemakers in the race, because I don't like the idea of anything that's in a race that's sole purpose isn't to go out there and win the race. So the sooner we can clamp down on all of that and make racing, look, you're never going to make it 100% perfect as far as being clean goes, but the closer we can get to that, the better it is for absolutely everyone.
That's fine. The final question I have on this topic is, we mentioned about in Hong Kong that a horse will always seem to run on its merits, in my opinion, whereas over here, I know from experience with certain people, they run horses and it's like a couple of runs here, we'll build him up. And we also saw the big plot job at Musselburgh, Southall, and I think it was another track the other week where 3 horses who had shown little to no form had all been smashed off the boards. 2 went in, the third got stuffed at Musselburgh. If that's happened in Hong Kong, would the proverbial book be launched at someone's head for trying to run a horse off its merits to try and peak on a certain day to earn a few quid in the back pocket?
It would never happen in Hong Kong. No one would be stupid enough to try it on, to be honest. Look, at the case you're talking about, I don't know. I mean, I think a couple of those runners were over the jumps, weren't they? And as I've said to you, I don't follow the jumps that closely. No, you would not get away with it in Hong Kong. On that subject, the one thing that nearly makes me cry sometimes is you watch punters going, oh, good on them, they've landed a touch and all that. They don't realise that when people do the wrong thing like that, when horses aren't running around on the merit, aren't being tried, it's the punter. I mean, you might not get stuff that day. You might even get on the gamble and make a few quid. But at some stage, something like that's going to well and truly stuff you. If you can't look at form and rely on the integrity of that form. And I'm not naive. I know all of it's not. And also, you've got to look at horses. I mean, they do in Australia a lot. They'll start off middle distance horses over 7 furlongs and build them up. But you know that that's what the plan is. So unless it's a Winx or so, you think you're not expecting to win over 6.5 furlongs first up. But it really does sort of rattle my cage a little bit that you'll get punters on there sort of going, oh, it's great because they haven't beaten the bookies. The bookies take it out for a ride. It comes under marketing. We've had to pay out millions on this. All right, I'm sure they don't want to lose the millions, but they just put it under the marketing budget, because then they can go without, oh, yeah, we've been touched up here and you guys have got us, rah, rah, rah. They might be fuming underneath, but they'll get some value out of it. But the people getting stuffed is the punter every time, because if you can't rely on that form, as I said, if you can't rely on the integrity of the form, believe you me, it's difficult enough making a quid in this game, as a gambler, as it is, without having to second guess what people are doing with their horses.
Also, the next question here is for somebody here. I have a simple question. Is there a reason why the Hong Kong Jockey Club, with so much cash, have a betting system that looks like it was built in the 1980s, and why they don't offer futures and also fixed odds? Okay,
futures and fixed odds comes in, and they try to keep everything sort of fairly strict to avoid any issues that we were talking about, integrity issues again. As far as a system goes in the 1980s, I'm not quite sure I understand what that means, because if anything, even though we've got lovely technology over here and beautiful pictures and that, I'd say we're sort of behind where everyone else is. What is really popular in any big tote system, Hong Kong, Japan, Australia, all those sort of America, France, all those sort of places, what they call exotics. Now, exotics is anywhere from a forecast to picking the winner of 6 different races, nominated races. Whereas over here, we still seem to be very much driven by win bets or win place bets. So sure, we like a place pot and we like a scoop 6, and there'll be a few people play the forecast and the TriCast. I remember when I first came over here 16 years ago, trying to put on a TriCast. In shock. Firstly, most of the races you couldn't even have a TriCast on. It would be like a 100-run handicap before they'd want to take you bet. And secondly, and this isn't a knock on the staff, they just did not understand what a TriCast was, because over here, people will go, I'll have 1 from 2 and 3. I'm going, well, I want 4 horses on the first line. I want 10 on the second line. I want 15 on the third line. There's whatever that adds up to. I don't know, let's say there's 600 combinations. I want to take it for a half. That's 300 quid. And you try to explain that to someone behind the till, and because they hadn't been trained by the firms, because it just wasn't a bet that most people were interested, especially if you're taking 600 combos. Because I'm looking at the race 8 to 1 the field, and I'm thinking this is going to pay thousands if we can land it. And they just didn't understand that. So I think you've got to remember, when you say it looks backwards, I don't know if it is backwards. I think we've got good technology over here and we do a lot of things right, but I think our mindset's maybe not backward. That's probably the wrong way to word it, but I think ours is in contrast with a lot of other systems. Hong Kong has a big tote, along with Japan, it would be the most powerful in the world. I mean, I think the main reason they won't move Royal Ascot this week, if we do open up on the 21st of June and put it back a week, is because Hong Kong have already cleared the boards because they're doing the co-mingling. And that means a lot. That's a great partnership. And I would think, I don't know the numbers, but I think it's worth a lot to Royal Ascot. So, look, when you ask that question, I suppose, again, it's horses for courses, what people get used to. But I certainly wouldn't say it's a backward system in Hong Kong. I think it's one of the most forward in the world. And the exotics over there, you go online 24 hours before a race, and they've already got 200,000-300,000 in the pool, pound that is, in the pool for a Class 5 handicap. So, they must be doing something right.
That's fine. The one question from me is, in terms of Hong Kong racing, is there any specific reason why we don't see races over sort of the 2 mile, the mile 6 distances, and only the distances go up to a certain level? Is there any specific reason why we don't have staying races in Hong Kong?
Well, I think for starters they'd have to do about 6 laps of Happy Valley, so that would count that out. It's a pretty small track. I think look, they don't have a breeding industry over there, and I think these days, if you have a look at even over here, a lot of people don't realise if you combine, I think it's France, England and Ireland, and you look at Group 1 races, there's as many, if not more, Group 1 races the mile and below. In Australia, there definitely is. Everyone hears about the Melbourne Cup and the Caulfield Cup, and they all boast over here when the Europeans go down there and kick the backside of the Aussies and the Kiwis, but people don't realise that a Melbourne Cup, we just don't run 2 mile races. So we've got all these poor horses running around. Some of them are flat out running past 10 furlongs. Here they are going over 2 miles. And now they've got the Europeans turning up who do stay. And people wonder why we're getting our backsides kicked. I think it's just for, the bottom line is they've got to buy all these horses. And the horses they're buying are all sort of sprinter milers, mile and a quarter types. Obviously, you've got a few races over a mile and a half, which is good to see. I mean, I'm lucky that I can watch a 5 furlong sprint down a straight course at Ascot like the King's Stand and absolutely love it. Then, obviously, like most people, watching an Arc over a mile and a half, or, whether it be a Prince of Wales over a mile and a quarter, absolutely love it as well. I think they've got a fairly good balance there. To have 5 furlong racing to a mile and a half, I think that's pretty sensible. Whereas if you start running 2 mile races in Hong Kong, you're going to have to start buying different types of horses, or you're going to have some horses that are going to be, you're going to have races where they're finishing, the winners finishing 15 lengths in front of the second and that type of thing.
That's been the Hong Kong View episode 2. My thanks to Tim for joining me today. We'll hopefully see you next week for another episode of All Things Hong Kong Racing.